Of that, I definitely want to share with you that, as I was telling you very briefly right before we broadcast it, my friend Mimi, who's a dear friend of yours as well, mentioned when I told her back in 2017 that I want to start something, what is now Creatives Around the World. When I mentioned it to her and I ran the idea past her, she was so supportive, and she told me that I absolutely must check out what her friend Daisy's doing. And she showed me the page Ocean Generation on Instagram. And I remember I was like, this is just incredible. This is really done so well. And I remember telling her, I love this. And I followed you right away. But I definitely didn't connect the dots a few years later. Now we're in 2020. That was 2 years ago. And then I think through YGL, the Young Global Leaders program at Northeastern, I've reconnected and found my path to you somehow. And it's really interesting. So, yeah, now I go back and think about it, and Mimi was like, well, I told you about this 2 years ago, Daisy. And you've come a long way since 2017 as well. So I'm really, really excited to have you. And I think so many of my friends were really excited to hear from you as well, because at such a young age, you have accomplished such an enormous amount of, you've done so much great work. And I think we all want to hear about your story, really. And who's the person behind all of this work that you're putting out. You've built a team, and you've really mobilized so many incredible people who are passionate about the same cause as you are. So we want to hear all about that. And before I just ask you your question, I started asking you lots of questions. I think I just want to very briefly introduce you, but I would like for you to tell us a lot about yourselves in your own words. But before I do that, I just want to mention a few things about you. So here we go. So after graduating from Northeastern in 2016, and while she was at Northeastern, Daisy interned at the United Nations in New York for the Permanent Mission of Grenada, and which is around the time when she founded Ocean Generation to disrupt and innovate the standard charity model. She was frustrated at the lack of awareness and action being taken by millennials and Gen Z to protect our climate and oceans. So she created Ocean Generation to utilize media and technology to inform, educate, and change behavior at a global scale. She is the youngest recipient of the 2018 Marie Claire Future Shaper Award, and was recognized as one of Britain's 50 most remarkable women by the Daily Mail. And there's so much more that we can talk about, but also most recently, Daisy has authored a book called The Climate is Changing, Why Aren't We? And we'd love to hear from you a lot about your journey authoring a book, and then telling us everything up until then, how you got here. So with that, Daisy, I'd love for you to just tell us your story from just growing up, going to Northeastern, and then your time at the UN, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, perfect. Well, obviously, thank you again for having me on your Creatives Around the World platform. I'm really excited to, have this conversation with you and to share more about, what we've done with Ocean Generation and plans moving forward. And obviously, thank you to Mimi, our mutual friend that connected us, which is great. But I guess the way that I started was obviously all thanks to Northeastern, which is where we both went to university in Boston. I went to high school my last 2 years here in Madrid, which is where I am now. And, did 4 years at Northeastern. And obviously they are very proactive in the work experience, co-op space. So in 2015, I did my second co-op at the United Nations, as you mentioned, which really was the catalyst and the turning point for what kind of set me on my path on my journey to where I am now, post-university and everything that created with Ocean Generation. Because Grenada is a small island, and 2015 was the year when they were introducing the Sustainable Development Agenda. So 17 goals for the next 15 years of our world. And for the first time in history, they were putting a big emphasis on climate change and ocean health. And working for an island, I was being sent to a lot of meetings about those goals that they were about to implement for climate and oceans. And I would sit in these meetings about climate change, at the age of like 20, and have no idea really the severity of climate change and its impact on the planet and really our generation. And so I started to talk to friends, and they had no idea about the severity of climate change. Through work at the UN, I would hear all these stories, and especially people's stories were the things that most kind of impacted me, when they would bring fishermen from different places and people from small island developing states, and they would talk about the fact that in 50 years they may not have an island, and under international law there's nothing that protects climate refugees, so who will they belong to? Or the impact of, fishermen not being able to catch their normal catch means not only no food for their communities, but it also means no income, and no livelihood. And through that, it's a whole spiral of, if there's no income and there's no food, even affects gender equality from the perspective that, if a family has less money, they'll probably send the boys, not the girls, to school. And everything from climate change, it just impacts absolutely everything. And what I realized is that from those climate goals, the rest of the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda would not succeed if we don't protect our planet, which ultimately protects people. So that was kind of like the kind of wake up call for me. But then it was kind of, what do I do as one individual, one person? And I had this really random idea that was kind of the starting point, which was kind of based off Bob Geldof's "We Are the World, We Are the Children" song, like 30 years ago, when he got all those artists together in one room for famine relief. I kind of had this idea of, if we did a song, "We Are the Oceans," could we raise awareness about what was happening with our oceans and planet? So long story short, ended up writing this proposal for this song, this ocean song, passed it around to some people. Some guys in London ended up writing a song called "We Are the Oceans." And then I was still living in New York, working at the UN, and they called me and they said, "Hey, we've written a song, what are you going to do with it?" And, I had absolutely no idea, because I have no connections in the music industry, no experience, didn't had to go back to Boston to finish uni. So it was kind of like, okay, well, let's just roll with this and see what happens. And in the end, ended up creating this campaign called #MyOcean. So if you go onto YouTube and you type in #MyOceans, a bunch of different versions of this ocean song will come online, because the idea was, 30 years ago, Bob Geldof got all of these artists into one room, and they all performed at once. But now we have platforms like YouTube and other things. And so we got different influencers to do their version of the song in their style and raise awareness through music about oceans. And that happened, and it was like a success. And then, people started to say, "What else are you going to do? Have you thought about education, blah, blah, blah." And again, I didn't really know. I didn't have a plan. And went back to Boston. And then when I was in London, I met a lady who connects charitable causes with gaming. And so again, long story short, ended up experimenting with gaming platforms, and we ended up doing a collaboration with Angry Birds. And again, the idea was...
Before you get into that, can you tell us a little bit about the time frame that it took from you? You were a co-op student. Northeastern has one of the world famous co-op programs, where we are all very privileged to be able to intern, and not really intern, actually have a full-time 6-month job before we graduate. So that's part of the UN program, was part of your job at UN, was part of that. So I want to understand, from your time during your co-op until you meeting and getting into this music side of things and launching this campaign, as well as getting to Angry Bird, what was the timelines, and what was your thought process, and how did it really... I want to understand specifics also.
I mean, it all happened within a year. So had the song, it launched while... when I was still... Well, we started when I was still in Boston, then I graduated, went to London, and then it kind of all started to move more quickly then. But all of that stuff was happening while I was still at university, while I was in Boston, after I'd finished my co-op in New York. So it was kind of balancing that.
Was this part of your plan, or it just sort of happened very organically? If you can
It
touch a
has
little
been
bit
super.
on what you were studying also at that time, and then how this happened, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, at university, I studied international relations as my major, and then I did a minor in law and public policy and social entrepreneurship, which obviously studying international relations and social entrepreneurship, you know, UN was a great fit. And I thought that was my dream job, and I thought that's exactly what I wanted to do when I came out of university. But with the co-op experience, I realized that it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So when I graduated, I didn't really have a plan. I didn't know exactly what career field I was going to go into. And as I was trying to figure that out, things with the Ocean Generation were just kind of snowballing and growing. And I ended up just kind of pursuing that full time, which was never a plan. It just kind of happened.
That's awesome.
And that's kind of the whole thing with Ocean Generation. I never really had a plan. So probably not the best advice, but that's the truth. And really it just came from taking every opportunity that came my way. The same like with meeting this lady for, you know, gaming and things. You know, we did this, ended up collaborating with Angry Birds. And the idea behind that was how can we use existing platforms and use their audiences to care about something and care about a cause. And in the end, we had 7.2 million players play our Angry Birds Ocean Gen collaboration. We did 3 games, one about sea level rise, one about plastic pollution, and one about drinking straws, which was a hot topic at the time. And from that, because of these activations, that generated a lot of attention in the space because it was innovative and no one else really was using those means. Is then why I ended up creating a foundation, because there was a lot of activity, but with the audiences that we were generating, there was nowhere for them to go. And so that's how Ocean Generation started. And really the mission behind it was, you know, again, back at that time in 2015, that was before like the plastic boom. And now, you know, a lot of people are a lot more aware about different climate topics. But back then, the kind of content that existed around sustainability and climate before it came super trendy like it is now was really either science policy research papers or kind of high school, teenage, young kid school packets. And there was nothing really for our age group. And there was not really much going on the platforms like Instagram and, you know, gaming and YouTube that, you know, our generation is using about climate change. And so that was kind of our experiment, and it succeeded.
That's really cool. I think before I ask some other questions, I just wanted to say for everyone who's tuning in, if you have any questions for Daisy as we go along, so please shoot them here in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get them based on how relevant they are, based on in regards to what we're speaking about. So I just wanted to put that out there because I forgot to earlier. But Daisy, I think what you did in terms of the graphics and also just the way you presented everything, it reminds me a lot of what Scott Harrison did with his charity Water. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. Yeah. So I think his story is so incredible as well, because he was not in this space, in this nonprofit space whatsoever. And then he just, I think storytelling and the way you present things plays such a big role in capturing audience, and with your intention of really capturing the audience with the millennials and Gen Z, you really hit the nail over there, and you just did it so well. And I think even when I look at your website right now, so for everyone tuning in, please check out oceangeneration.org, because it's just curated so well, and it's just informative, educational, but also really engaging to look at. So all of these things, considering that you studied international relations, law, and social entrepreneurship, is this something you had an inclination for, or did you have really great mentors helping you out with that kind of stuff? Yeah, I'll let you speak.
I mean, the idea behind the branding and the look and the feel is that, one, I think we're in an era where kind of there's a bit of a stigma around nonprofits, and I feel like maybe our generation isn't as trusting in the old nonprofit model as they used to be. So first of all, and also for the environment, it was how can we inspire action, and how can we appeal to also mass audiences, because right now climate change and sustainability for a while had this stigma that you have to be a certain type of way. It kind of has this hippie stigma attached to it. And, you know, I'm the total opposite. And so I didn't fit into that box. So sometimes it was questions, well, how can you care about this when, you know, you're not 100% zero waste living or vegan or things like that. And that was a stigma also that I wanted to change and challenge, because this has to be a lifestyle. So if you look at Ocean Generation, the branding, etc., it's trying to promote a lifestyle and promote change within our own lifestyles, within our own means. And also, clearly for a while, the stereotypical blue-green organizations weren't really disrupting the change that really needed to happen. And so instead of going along that traditional path of, becoming another blue-green organic organization, I decided, and I have a amazing person that I work with called Brad, who he has a couple of like really successful social media pages, like this one called Truffle and things like that. But they post things like Kim Kardashian and Rihanna, and we bonded over, well, if millions of people can care about Kim Kardashian, how can we get millions of people to care about a good cause, or something that's worth fighting for? And so that was the idea always behind the look and the feel. And so sometimes when people look at Ocean Generation, they don't really get it, and they're not really sure why it's like that. But the idea was to disrupt, and again, always it's just been trial and error, because there was no right or wrong way to do it, and we just experimented with the mediums that we had.
Yeah, because that really stands out, and then I think that's one of your biggest strengths, I think, and why you captured the audience, and at least that's what I think. So I wanted to also ask you, you were going to get into this a little bit more in detail, but I think when we started talking, you were so incredibly kind, because I told you this is something that I want to start, and I want to interview a lot of people, and I'm really inspired by the storytelling aspect of people doing great things, and this aspect of networks for good. So I think you, in your journey, I think something what you've accomplished is not possible without the support of a lot of people. So I'd love for you to touch upon that in terms of how you've really leveraged your networks in a positive way. And while you do that, I'm going to ask you also, because I think when we were speaking, you briefly mentioned how it wasn't so clear. Everything didn't, like, as you said already, it wasn't a plan. It wasn't something that you had thought of through. So it sort of happened very organically. And in terms of call to action, that was very important, because every time someone starts an initiative like this, how do you start thinking of the call to action from the get-go, and really navigating what that call to action will be and how effective that's going to be. In your case, I know you traveled a lot, and I think that's played a huge role in how you really were able to develop a level of individual and personal connection to the causes that you're so passionate about now. And I think that's possibly one of the biggest reasons into why you're so passionate about taking this forward. So if you can share your experience in connecting with these people who are in the front line facing the negative aspects of climate change that a lot of us, because of where we are and our privilege, don't necessarily experience, that would also really help us connect more with your story. So if you can share a little bit more about that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, we already touched upon kind of the media, kind of using innovative platforms to educate. But the other side of Ocean Generation that's like really important, and what's kind of really close to my heart, off the back of having the opportunity to travel to lots of different places, and also working at the UN and listening to the people's story, was the people aspect of climate change. And what I was always seeing was, everyone like would see turtles and whales and things, and, everyone's heartstrings would be pulled about those stories about, what was happening to those animals and things like that. But really what I realized in this space as well is that so very few people were working with the people aspect of climate change, but also including the voices of the people who are affected most by climate change. And so that's kind of what set Ocean Gen on its kind of other prong.
I think I've lost
Ocean Gen.
Oh, there you go.
Okay,
I
can
lost
you hear
you
me?
just a little bit, but it's fine now. Yeah. I can hear you now.
Hello?
I think you're fine. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. My internet went off, sorry. So the other aspect is like the people aspect of climate change, and that's something that I'm particularly passionate about. And so I really wanted to work with, you know, young people, tell their stories, and also include them in the solution building process in places where, you know, they are on the front lines of climate change, because it's very different being in London or Madrid or New York and saying, oh, you know, climate change is affecting the planet. But when you see firsthand that people's homes are washing away today, that people are going hungry because of changing weather patterns, that, you know, natural disasters are becoming more frequent and intense because of climate change, you know, we have to help these communities and we have to do something. So part of Ocean Generation, with its support, it, you know, started to host programs on the ground. So we've done stuff from film documentary workshops with young people to, in the end, our programs became teaching young people how to code. And most people are like, why would an environmental organization teach people how to code? Well, the idea behind it is because, you know, these young people that would normally rely on tourism or fishing or those type of industries can no longer rely on them because of climate change. So how can we future-proof these generations? And coding is a perfect way. You know, it's giving them a skill that they can apply not just in their environment, but it makes them employable. And a lot of these communities as well have lower access to education and different elements. So that's kind of what we started, teaching young people how to code from climate vulnerable communities. And we also hosted various different hackathon events. We were the first organization to host a hackathon, for example, in the Caribbean. And, you know, why is that so relevant when there's so many hackathons that go around, you know, everywhere in the world? Well, because 95% of our participants were actually victims of a natural disaster or are on the front lines of climate change. And so they know exactly, you know, what they need and what type of solutions they need to build with different climate issues. And so the platform was always then with Ocean Generation to give voice to these other people and to be like a tool and a resource to support these communities. So we've grown with those kind of two aspects, the media and then the people aspect. And that's something that, you know, I'm really passionate about.
I think I want to share with everybody the video that you shared with me on the hackathon that was on the ground. Where was that, Daisy? Was that in Dandy
The video, that's in Antigua and Barbuda.
Yeah. That was incredible. I think it gives a little bit of an overview of how things, how you were on the ground. I think you can relate better to it once you watch that video. But I'd love to hear, like, while you were there, what was your experience working with this community, and how long did you spend time, and how long do these hackathons last, and what are the takeaways that you gather from there, and the next steps once you organize these?
So it depends. So we've hosted various like summer schools for young people. So they run for a couple of weeks over summer holidays. To date, we've educated about 360 young people through our summer camps, and then which have happened over various summers. And then the hackathon events, they're just like 3 or 4 day events, like sprints that happen. But what we really try to encourage is that, you know, this is not just an event that happens once and then it disappears. One of our core partners at the time was a division of the UN, and they, in partnership with us and with other things that we've been doing, opened innovation hubs. So some of the best ideas were incubated within these innovation hubs so that the ideas could come to life. And that's what's really important, because the ideas are one thing, but actually, you know, creating and bringing solutions to life is a whole other, you know, life of its own. And so we try to encourage partners, you know, like at our events, we had people from Sony, from the UN, Samsung, you know, a bunch of different partners that would be willing to potentially support these ideas from young people and take them forward and build them out. So
that's really incredible. I also I was just wondering, because I think now it's been about 4 years since the Ocean Generation's been working, and like with all of their initiatives, is that right? So have you been involved in on the day-to-day operations of running Ocean Generation for the last 4 years, or is this something? What is if you can share a little bit about what's next, and for instance, if I wanted to get involved in lots of the things that you were putting out there, what are the best ways for anyone who's interested, who wants to get educated, what are some of the key resources you think that they should look into, and also actively, if they want to participate and get involved with Ocean Generations, whatever you can share on that would be also useful.
Yeah, so at the very beginning, yeah, I was super involved with everything, basically micromanaged absolutely everything. And between a really small team of like 3 and 4 people, we used to do absolutely everything. And then, to be honest, because, as I said, I never really had a plan and this kind of all kept rolling. And, when I was, 21 years old and started this and started to raise funds and things like that to make this happen, I was probably slightly naive about the way that the world works and what happens within the nonprofit space and other elements. And so actually last year, I decided that I would take a step back from the nonprofit world. And so actually I was going to wind Ocean Generation down despite all of the things that, incredible work that we've done. It was just for personal reasons, time to step away from the charity space. And so it was kind of dealing with that of like, how do I really kind of keep Ocean Generation's legacy alive, but also, take a step away to focus on other professional career goals and things. And at one point it looked like kind of the journey was coming to an end, but actually in the very near future, almost certain, that we are partnering with another organization that have a bunch of incredible resources behind them and people. And so together we'll be taking on the Ocean Gen legacy with them and building it out. And so there's really exciting things to come. So if people follow us on social media, keep up to date with what we're doing on Instagram and our website, announcements will be coming soon. But what we've really always said is essentially kind of our slogan is join the collective. And the idea behind the join the collective is that, again, like I mentioned before, you don't have to be one type of person to care about the environment. We're inviting everyone, and no matter what your skill or your strength or your passion is, how can you bring that to the collective, and how can you make a change within your own ecosystem or within a wider audience to make a difference. So yeah, anyone that's interested in doing anything, just reach out to us via our socials, follow us. We use our kind of platforms now just as like education tools, but when we have more programs and different things up and running, like announcements go out through those.
And how often are you having these hackathons where you kind of require community participation, and like where it's just more of an accelerated effort, not just from your team, but also the community?
So far it's been summers, just because when we're working with young people, they have summers off. So it makes most sense to work with them during summertime.
Okay.
So.
That's awesome. I'd also love for you to talk a little bit about, so we are in the middle of COVID, and I think a lot of people who are very passionate about making change, and I think before the pandemic, I think there was some kind of, because of social media, because of all of the efforts for the likes of Greta Thunberg, the kind of media that she's got as well, there was almost traction towards the climate change movement that was sort of being built. And obviously that's got to do a lot longer. It's much more than Greta's work that's really got us there. But I feel like with the pandemic, we could say that there's a new, there's almost this, people are focused on their personal safety and just the idea of, I think I'd love to, with this question, what I'm trying to get at is I'd love to get your thoughts on the concept of circular economy, and with the single-use plastic that's, or not just plastic, but there's a lot of use of protective gear that's happening with the masks and the gloves, and people just entirely focused on protecting themselves, and like what the future looks like is very uncertain. And I think the pandemic has presented some the good side has been that the carbon emissions are reduced. So if there's any advice you can share on that front, in terms of how people can continue to stay sustainable in their own means, that would be really great before I sort of move on to my more specific entrepreneurial questions for you. So yeah.
Yeah, obviously, I think the world is probably about to recalibrate on some major scale after we've just gone through, most people 3 months plus in confinement. The good side for climate change, as you mentioned, is that, emissions were cut severely. The earth kind of had a break from airplanes and cars. And And, there was lots of, while there was a lot of negative news in media, there was actually a lot of positive stories that you would see about the environment, from, dolphins reappearing on coasts, to, areas becoming clean. So, we had that carbon emission break, and, hopefully that's something that can continue, and also something that people, from this pandemic kind of rethink about their lifestyle choices and what happens. I mean, unfortunately, because of, things happening so quickly, as you mentioned, there's much more plastic and masks and gloves and, protective gear that medical people have to use, etc. And right now, immediately, there is no kind of alternative solution. I mean, for personal use, I mean, I'm just looking here on my desk, and, I have a reusable mask. So that's something, instead of, using a material one that you can, instead of the disposable, you can use a material one. And the same goes for gloves. But I think kind of we're in a moment where people in the climate space really want to make sure that all the proactive progress that had been made up until this point doesn't go back during this pandemic, because governments and policymakers and businesses, their attention has been diverted, understandably, because of everything that's been going on. So from an environmental perspective, we hope that all the progress within policy, etc., doesn't go back in time. But I think it's a great moment for people to reflect about their own lifestyle choices. And when you mentioned the circular economy, I think there's a lot of proactive movement happening. I think a lot of what businesses are doing, business with purpose, also even looking from kind of the fashion movement, how brands are trying to become more sustainable. Obviously, you have to be aware of greenwashing and, companies, using marketing to promote a cause, which they're not actually changing fundamentally at the core of their business models. But I think it's time people are rethinking the way that we live and the resources that we use. So I think that there's, something positive that can come out of the COVID pandemic.
Absolutely. I think while you were speaking on all of that, Daisy, I was just looking at a couple of the few questions that we've got here. And I think there's a lot of cheer on for you, for all the great work that you're doing. Everyone is saying that, we need strong governments and long-lasting impact projects such as what you're involved in, and keep up the good work and awareness and effort that you're on. And we're glad that you didn't decide to shut this down, because I can understand that you want to kind of try something. You got into this at a really young age, right after Northeastern. You've been sort of fully committed towards this initiative and collective of yours, which has very organically. And I think I personally just want to say, I feel like one of the biggest things that has made you and made the initiative and yourself so successful is the fact that you've done it with so much of authenticity, and you've really just taken it one step at a time. And I think I will say it again, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you told me that I can reach out to you whenever I need any help. So I think for anyone listening in also, if they have any initiative that they want to start, they want any advice from Daisy, they should feel free to reach out to her. But I specifically want to ask, Saad Khalil, she said that I'm just one person, only 7 billion people said that. How can someone in a third world country make a difference in climate change as an individual? If that's something, because a lot of what you've said has already touched upon that, but I'll let you just keep that as something you'd want to answer. But also, what type of service projects would be appropriate and interesting for the middle school and high school school audience in terms of ocean generation? For example, this is Sachi who's asking this question, and I think she's in Paris right now. So Sachi, for example, I've helped organize a walk for water, taught fourth graders about water filtration and pollution, and designed a t-shirt raising awareness about water wastage. So her question is, what type of service projects would be appropriate and interesting for a middle school and high school audience in terms of ocean generation?
I guess I'll interpret this question as things that she can do on the ground herself in Paris, or stuff that we're doing with Ocean Gen. I guess either way. I mean, I think also it's important for each person to look around into their own kind of ecosystem and their own context and their own city. And even you mentioned from before, someone from the developing world, you know, what can we do? It's probably completely different to what someone in Paris would do. For example, if you're in Accra versus Paris, you know, what projects you would work on would be really different. But just from the kind of middle school, high school perspective, some of the partners that we're partnering with now from Plastic Oceans, they have incredible educational resources for like middle school, high school students. So if she wants to reach out, I can share some of those plastic resources and other educational materials that we have to share. And then from the individual action perspective, actually, not to like plug my thing, but actually something that's coming out in August is a book that I've written called The Climate is Changing, Why Aren't We? And it's actually a book dedicated to kind of a practical guide to how we can make a difference as individuals. Because I think that's one of definitely the main kind of themes within the environmental topics, is that most people say, well, you know, it's so big, carbon emissions, policy level, governments, you know, climate agreements, how can I do anything? It's just, you know, out of my hands. And it's not true. And it's exactly what, you know, was quoted about, you know, one person, 7 billion people. If everyone started to make small changes, it will actually make a difference. And lots of people don't believe that either. They say, oh, it's not possible, blah, blah. But I really think it does. And I really think that it starts with us as individuals. And again, the idea is that not everyone is perfect and not everyone is able to do everything, depending on where you live and your socioeconomic means. And, you know, lots of different factors contribute to that. But I think that we can all definitely start making more conscious choices. And within those conscious choices, you know, whether they're perfect or not, the idea is that the starting point is caring. And, you know, in the book, you know, I talk about some of the people stories that we've interacted with in Ocean Generation and the communities and stuff. And I think that once people start to feel empathy and start to feel something, I think that's when, you know, we start to change as individuals, and everyone has the power to do something, absolutely something, from, you know, reducing your plastic consumption to reducing your meat consumption, to, you know, being more conscious about the brands that you buy from. We all have the power to make a change, and that's really important. And I firmly stand by that. Everyone can make a difference.
Yeah, I think, Daisy, I read on your website that this is something I read on your website, and I'd like to just say it out loud, is that you're also, I'd love for you to, I love that you brought up the fact that you're writing a book. I want you to get into, you know, how that happened, and like even that, from what I know personally, was a very organic experience. Sort of someone, people reached out to you, is not something that was a part of the plan either way. And I think this is important to share with everyone, because I feel like it goes to show that there's a lot of serendipitous things that happen in all of our lives, and they always lead us towards our next step and what we're going to do next. And that's why it's important to hear stories from, how is it that someone that we look up to and someone we think has done such incredible work, how did they really come about doing that? So I want to hear how you really got around to that. But something I saw on your website is that, or from the book, for everybody who's tuning in, Daisy's book, The Climate is Changing, Why Aren't We?, is available for pre-order on Amazon, and it actually was supposed to release in June, but because of the pandemic, the release had to be pushed back until August. But when I was researching it, I saw this little blurb which said that the severity of climate change leaves no one indifferent. Uh, the book does not try to convince you that climate change exists, because we know that it does. Instead, it offers easy to understand insights into the structures that suffocate our future, and whilst upholding the sense of optimism, it serves to humanize the climate change story. And the word humanize is something that I really relate with, Daisy, because we had a really interesting speaker a couple of weeks ago who was talking about the trials that the modern slavery world and, like, you know, various prostitutes go through, because I'm bringing this up because the problem is that, and even with racism, with everything that's happening in America, the problem is that when you are not able to connect with a certain group of people who are facing a lot of discrimination or are facing issues at the front line, you are much less likely to really empathize with them, as you said, and sort of want to be part of developing solutions. So I really like that you said that, and I wanted to just sort of tie that back from what I heard a couple of weeks ago. So humanizing and connecting with the problem is extremely important. As summarizing it was as what you said. I have another question that I'd like to ask you. Actually, no. First, if you can tell us a little bit about the book and story, and then I'll get into the question that I received.
Yeah, sure. So the book, as you said, was very much, again, an organic journey. This lady read an interview that I did in Marie Claire magazine. And this lady reached out on LinkedIn and she sent me a message and she said, hi, I read your interview in Marie Claire magazine. I think you'd be a great candidate to write a book about climate change. If you're interested, here's my email. I work for this company, there's a brand publishing, get in touch. So I, Googled her, she was legit. Sent her an email and met her for coffee, and we had a great conversation. And she said, I think it's really interesting, and especially from a young woman's perspective, what you've done so far with your organization and just your experience and exposure to, different kind of climate situations, because we've done stuff in disaster relief zones and different places. And so, she said, put a pitch together and I'll share it with my editors. And, if they like it, we'll give you an offer. So I put together they also told me, we're looking for a book that can connect with people on a very kind of human, individual level. So, it's practical, how people can make practical changes in their life. So yeah, I put together a proposal. They really liked it. They gave me an offer, and I spent last year writing, I think, about 65,000 words, which I never thought was possible. But I learned an incredible amount along the way. And the book is really kind of divided into different chapters from different industries, from plastic to food to fashion to kind of travel, lifestyle, women, and people. And looking at how all those different, industries, and then women and people are separate, but how those different industries affect the climate, and then, how corporations can do better, but then also how us as individuals can make changes in our lifestyle to help the environment within those spaces. So the hope is that it's super easy for people to understand. At the beginning, I'm super transparent, and people who know me know that I'm not your typical environmentalist. And my point in the message was that's okay, because again, you don't have to fit into a certain box to care about the environment. Everyone needs to do something. We should all care for our own children and for future generations. And so, I don't do everything that I've written in the book of what you can do. For example, composting in London is not very practical. So, I don't compost at my apartment. But, there's all tips and things that people can pick up, to what suits them and their lifestyle. And hopefully it's, as it says on the title, like a practical guide to what people can do to help.
I think, Daisy, on that note, I think we got a question that's something that I wanted to ask you, but also Sarah, thanks for your question, and also Valentina. We've got two questions that if you could tackle would be great. In some ways, would you say that a circular economy contradicts a capitalist one? Do you believe it is possible to run on a sustainable capitalist market? But while you answer that, I think Sarah's question also makes sense, which is, do you feel that your use of social media platforms makes scientific information on climate change more accessible and more supported, as well as the humanized impact? So essentially, how would you recommend governments and NGOs make scientific information more accessible to the masses? So they are slightly different questions, but I think it's essentially discussed. It would be great if you kind of would almost provide advice for governments and NGOs in terms of, there's so many within not just climate change, but there's NGOs that exist across so many sectors. So if they really want to accelerate and amplify their impact, if there's any just quick brief advice that you can share with them, that would also be great.
Yeah, okay, so I'll tackle the first question first about the circular economy. So that's a really good question, because it's something that I came up, when writing the book. And for example, you look at the fashion industry, how can you encourage, a circular economy in an industry that's based on consumption and capitalism and buying more? That's how brands make their money. That's why we have, instead of 2 seasons a year, there's 16 season capsules that brands are putting out. And how how is that not contradictory when the industries make money off the back of selling more? So it's a really good question, because it's true. They're kind of very conflicting ideas. And there's one way to look at it. One is that, realistically, how far are brands willing to go to be, sustainable and promote kind of the longevity of using products that we buy, and, not throwing clothes away as easily, or, reusing items as much as possible. That's kind of down to us as a consumer of how we decide to go about that, but also how willing are brands to change their business models. So I know I keep mentioning fashion, but it's just because it's like on the top of my mind. But for example, we look at like different business models like Rent the Runway, or renting clothes, or vintage platforms, or sharing platforms. Are there opportunities for different business models to fit into these gaps that we're seeing between traditional brands and circular economy? And instead of kind of improving what already exists, is there room for new business models? And I firmly believe that, there is money to be made in solving some of the world's biggest problems. And, it doesn't always have to be charity and philanthropy. So how can businesses innovate? Because, at the end of the day, businesses have to make money. So they need to find new ways of, becoming more circular and becoming more sustainable. So it's a really good question, and I don't have the answer, but it's a whole minefield of arguments and opinions on that matter. And then to touch on the second question about kind of scientific information stuff, yeah, it's really easy to get caught up into kind of headlines of, that are dramatized over certain issues about kind of like, you read breaking headlines, but actually deep down on the mainstream media platforms, the science is incorrect. And that's one of the challenges in the environmental space of making sure that, the information that's put out is actually evidence-based, and there's not really much quality control. So it's really difficult to identify, but that's actually something that Ocean Generation is trying to work on. And hopefully, like with our new partners, I told you, we're merging soon. They have amazing science data research. So how can we essentially become a translation platform for this information? So how can we take, these really long scientific reports, and how can we translate them into bite-sized chunks that's engaging and understanding for our generation? And also, as we all know, we all have, really short attention spans, most of us, because of the likes of Instagram, and, we just flip through our phone and, we want to see, 2 seconds of something. So how can we actually translate, those policy papers and that scientific research, which is so important, into something digestible, understandable, and interesting for people to read? So that's something that actually we're working on and we're striving towards. But yeah, it's a shame, because scientists will spend years and hours and so much time dedicated to creating and to informing us on different topics that are happening in the world, and then so few people read their data and their research, and it just gets stored somewhere. So how can we translate that essentially? And that's something that we're working on.
Daisy, just on that note, I think I wanted to also ask you, because what you said about scientists translating the information that they are sort of researching on, that kind of, and I actually, before we wrap up, I want to ask you a few personal questions in terms of your journey, but I'd just like you to wrap this section of our discussion up in terms of, there are various economies, and this is something you've actually discussed with me when we spoke earlier. I think you mentioned how being part of the UN, when you weren't assigned to work with Grenada, but also a country like the UK and the Grenada, they have to do similar amount of work. But the resources that these countries have is extremely, it's absolutely far from equal. So with various economies that have all of these disparate resources, and some economies having basically a huge debt in terms of climate action that they can take. If there's anything you've thoughts that you've accumulated over time working in, and being part of, being privileged enough to be part of both sides of the story, knowing how things function in the UK, in a city like Madrid, also in New York, all of these places, and also in a place such as Grenada, where there's very limited resources. So what are your thoughts in terms of the economic growth cycles, and like Yeah, is it fair? Like, yeah, just what are your thoughts? No question there.
I mean, it's not fair at all. It's completely unfair. And what you generally see is that the countries that have contributed the least to climate change actually are affected the most by climate change. So, these, small islands that have hardly, in comparison to, larger countries have basically zero carbon emissions. And now, populations are completely vulnerable. Islands are washing away, islands are sinking, homes are washing away. How is that fair? It's not. And unfortunately, that's the harsh reality. And so from a few of the climate talks that I've been to, from like COP and different ones, it's always that argument of, we've contributed least. So, why? And also the other thing is, like, you look at places like Africa, etc., and everyone's talking about renewable energy. But, some countries are annoyed because they say, well, you in the West, you had all your factories, and, you industrialize, and you use, ridiculous amounts of fossil fuels. And now you're telling us that we can't do that with our own economies. And we have to, automatically transition to renewable energy. How is that fair? It's not. So it creates a lot of tension, I would say, between kind of political spheres, because of that pure factor, that it really kind of isn't fair. And, especially from the larger countries that are supposed to make, larger commitments, are they meeting their targets? Not quickly enough. Are they working hard enough to reduce their emissions? Other things, probably not hard enough again. So, how do you come up with a fair plan for everyone? It just, at the moment, it just doesn't exist. So that's why I think that, sometimes it can be depressing to look at it from kind of a government perspective. And then we see, people like Trump that completely pull out of climate agreements, after years and years and years of hard work of, putting together these agreements, and then they decide just to pull out and kind of retract on all the good work that's been done. That, honestly, it sucks. Like, it's disheartening to see from the top level. So that's why I think, if we have to look at that, it's depressing. But if we look at ourselves and ourselves as individuals, how can we make a change? Let's do something with ourselves if we can't rely on the people that, that we're supposed to rely on.
Exactly. I think I'm glad you addressed that, Daisy, because I feel like I did, when we spoke, it's something that came up, and I feel like that's something more people sort of need to be aware of, that there's an element of privilege that comes with where we are or where we're born, and we did nothing to,
Yeah.
absolutely nothing to be born into the family that we're born into the country, and like, and the circumstances we're born into. And I think that's just a conversation for absolutely another day, in terms of why and how that happens. um, but I think I'd love for you to also just, I think, Carolyn, I'd love to sort of end on, this question about, Carolyn said that, um, if there are action prompts that the Northeastern University Network can help us with the collective that both of us are trying to put out there, they would really be interested in sort of being part of the whole ecosystem, in terms of how the campus can be a sustainable resource for us. So thank you so much for that, Carolyn. But also, Daisy, I want to hear about a little bit about your who are your mentors in your whole process of, you moving in, from a career standpoint, from a personal standpoint. I think you're someone that I personally really look up to, and I think I want to announce it one more time that Daisy is someone who is the same age as I am, and she's been recognized by, she's got awards for all of the work that she's done. And it's incredible how far along that she's come. And I think, Daisy, sometimes you can come across as someone who's fairly intimidating for someone who's 26. So please share a few thoughts of yours on that, and also just any tell us a little bit about your mentors. What do you have a plan in place? What's next for you? And how is it that, on personal standpoint, from a career standpoint, you've come along this way?
Um, well, thank you for your kind words. I don't think I'm intimidating at all, but I guess that's perception. Actually, I would definitely say, and this might sound a bit kitsch, but my main mentor, and always has been my dad. And you know, he's really been kind of the person behind constantly kind of inspiring me to follow, you know, what I want to do and my dreams, but also kind of keep a commercial kind of level head on, you know, not getting tied up in, you know, not so much the nonprofit world, but how to make this sustainable and how to make the wheels keep going round in something, because running a nonprofit is very much like running a business. And so he's been my mentor, and he is my mentor. And so, as I said, I thought I was going to close down Ocean Gen, but we're not anymore, which is really good. We're going to be merging with another organization, which is really exciting. And me personally, I'm going to start actually working for my family business this year. Or I have been for the past year, but now it's going to get more serious. So I'm kind of, you know, diverting slightly career path. I'm also currently doing a master's at the moment, a part-time master's in global corporate compliance at IE University in Madrid, which again is very different, doesn't apply to the nonprofit sector, but from kind of a business and a commercial perspective, you know, compliance is a really, really hot topic at the moment. So that's why I decided to do a master's in that, which I'm currently doing. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on at the moment, but a lot of positive things that are leading, I think, to a slightly new direction for a career, which we'll see what happens.
And how have you utilized this time of where most of us have been in quarantine, sort of been in like, yeah, in this lockdown mode? Have you been hyper proactive, or have you sort of hibernated and taken a break?
I would say a bit of both. I mean, fortunately, as I mentioned, I'm doing a master's at the moment. So, and because it's part-time, normally, you know, you'd have work and you're doing a master's at the same time. But coronavirus provided a really good break to really focus on my master's studies, which was great. Planning this merger with Ocean Generation, this other organization, has all happened over Corona times, and also just spending more time with family and really appreciating, you know, what's important. So the kind of 3 months in lockdown were a welcome 3 months, I think, for me personally, just to kind of think about everything moving forward.
That's awesome. I think, Daisy, I really like that you said that your dad has been your biggest inspiration for you and a sort of motivation. I know mine is for me, and he's listening on this as well. So I feel like there's so much that I learned from you, and I think all of us can learn from you in terms of how far along that you've come along in your journey, working within the nonprofit world, but also for you entering the world of for-profit, but still continuing to make an impact. I think something that personally, I know Mimi will attest to this, because I used to always tell her, I feel like that I don't want to push the message of always being, you know, a social entrepreneur. The idea of entrepreneurship is always trying to come up with a solution or doing something that always, it's only sustainable. Any business that you're sort of putting out there, any idea you're putting out there, is only sustainable if it can sustain you as an individual, and only then it can really take it forward. So I think you've really, I know you've been in the non-profit world, but even with that, you've done it very innovatively with all of the work that you did with Angry Birds and with Joss Stone. Also, I think there are some ways where I feel like the networks and the people that came into your life certainly played a huge role in taking you a step further. And also the people and your friends, mentors, Northeastern, they've played an incredible role. It's what I gather from everything that you've shared with us. So I think I just want to say thank you so much. And you've been an incredible person for me personally to communicate with. And I know that, I think I just want to say it out there that I was talking to you about this earlier, but I'm going to launch a podcast in terms of what all these incredible conversations I have, and I feel like, so I think this is me announcing that, and Daisy's definitely going to be someone that I'm really excited to bring on, and there's a lot of inspiration that we can take from someone who's our age and who's doing a lot of great stuff. So thank you so much for that, Daisy, and for everyone who wants to reach her. Daisy, do you want to tell us your email or anything that you can share? And also find her on Ocean Generation. That's something that she's still very closely, even though there's someone else who's soon going to take over, and we'll wait to find out who that is. But yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah, so people can follow Ocean Generation. My email is daisy@oceangeneration.org. And then my personal Instagram is Daisy S. Kendrick. But thank you to you, Val, for having me on your platform. I think it's amazing what you're doing, and all your kind words. And thank you to everyone that was listening to this session that we had.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. Daisy, I will stay in touch with you, and
Yes.
start talking about the podcast now. And also for everybody, just one more time, Daisy's book is available on Amazon pre-order, and I'm really excited to get it myself. So I did want to just mention that. I feel like such a promotional person saying that. I'm not used to it ever. But the
I know, and it makes me
topic
slightly embarrassed, but thank you.
I know. So am I. It is available on Amazon. I hate to be doing this, but I feel like it's just something. The topic of our conversation today did mention that. So please get it, because it's all about practical information in terms of how you can incorporate little changes that would really help make a difference. So yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great night. And Daisy, you have a great day as well. And I'll speak to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.